It is such an honor to welcome Jonathan Pryce and Fernando Meirelles. I'm going to ask them a few questions about the wonderful film we have just seen, and towards the end we will take a few questions from the audience as well. So I did want to start with a little bit about the origins. For Jonathan Pryce, I mean, how did you get involved in this project, and were you already familiar with the work of director Fernando Meirelles? Here are the titles that I think most people will recognize: City of God, and The Constant Gardener, and Blindness. And was that part of what made you say yes?
Yes. So that's it, really. No, the script came to me by my agent, the usual way. They said they want you to play Pope Francis. I was initially doubtful about whether I wanted to do it, but I thought I'd be on a hiding to nothing playing a living Pope. And the script read very well, but you know, you could read it in a very academic way. It's two old men talking to each other at length. But I always knew that Fernando was going to be directing it, and that made me, I was fairly confident that it wasn't going to be a straight biography, it wasn't going to be a hagiography, it was going to have something that had a great deal of life and energy to it, and a point of view which wasn't necessarily about the church. It was about the wider issues that that the script throws up and that Pope Francis talks about. So, no, I definitely knew I wanted to do it straight away.
And for Fernando, were you initially visualizing two actors like Jonathan Pryce and Anthony Hopkins, or when you read Anthony McCartan's script, was it primarily the themes, the dialogue, the way that it gave life to them? At what point did you decide on this gentleman?
The first thing that attracted me was something on Pope Francis before we had the script. And then the script came, and I had to find an actor. First thing you do is you Google Pope Francis to see which actor would feel alike. And of course, at that point, he was on being High Sparrow in Game of Thrones. There was hundreds of photos of Jonathan and the Pope next to each other. Of course, I had to check. And different works of Jonathan, and I saw some interviews of Jonathan being Jonathan, and I felt he had the same energy of the very good sense of humor, and I felt the same kind of feeling that I feel with the Pope. Now, so he was my first choice, and I had worked with Tony before, so we sent him the script, and I was lucky enough. The two first choices, both of them wanted to be part of the film, could do it, so.
And I realized only after seeing the film that this was not the first time you were playing an Argentine character, namely in Evita, Juan Perón, alongside Madonna. I don't know, Fernando, had you seen that? Was the idea of Jonathan as an Argentine? Nah, that wasn't there.
No, but we're playing a film on Maradona, and I'm having ideas.
Maradona, the later years I'm going to play.
Okay. Well, in this film, I think everyone here is aware of the layers that you bring to this character, playing Pope Francis with gentle conviction and this sort of lovable whimsy. And I was wondering, was that character, as you play him, already alive in the screenplay of Anthony McCartan? In other words, could you see already what that man was? Or was it primarily a function of your working together in rehearsal or not to find that character?
No, oddly enough, it all comes from Pope Francis. I'm not a Catholic. I was raised in a Presbyterian church in Wales, and I used to go to chapel every Sunday, and I'd go to Sunday school. And as a teenager, like millions of other teenagers, left the church, left organized religion. And this was the first Pope I felt had ever really spoken to me. I was aware of all the other popes over the years, you know, the the avuncular pope, the slightly austere pope, the pope who was possibly poisoned, all the different popes. But this was the first pope that I felt was saying things that I wanted to hear said by a world leader. And he was talking about issues that I and millions of others felt very strongly about. And I was attracted to him because of his politics and certainly less about the church. And I saw in him someone I had liked and admired. And, you know, whether he was in the script or not, he was my inspiration.
Right.
And, you know, you get asked, how do you build a character? And this is the first time I've ever answered. I didn't build it, he built it, and I follow in his footsteps. And it's, you know, everything's there to see and to research. And my initial fears of playing a living pope, they changed, you know, almost overnight. It was a lot easier to play a living person than a dead one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
I've played a lot of dead ones. Yeah, not popes, people. Yeah.
And Fernando, you said that you wanted to make a film about Pope Francis even before you saw the script. I'd like to know a little bit whether your reasons are similar to Jonathan's.
Exactly the same.
Did you, for example, see the documentary of Wim Wenders from 2018, Pope Francis, A Man of His Word?
Yeah, no, I watched it, and my reasons are exactly the same. Was very interested in the Pope. First of all, when he became a Pope, I never really cared much about the Vatican. I don't like much that world. But when he became a Pope, he was that pop star figure, and so open and so, I mean, charming. Everybody started liking him. And then he published his encyclica called Laudato Si, the care of our common home. And I thought it was wonderful, extraordinary, because it's an encyclica based on science that tell us that we have to take care of the planet because we're consuming the planet. And I thought, wow, the church writing such important document on science, based on science. And anyway, he became really I think, one of the most important voice in the world for me. It's the guy who really tries to build bridges instead of building everybody else in this wave of nationalism and populism that wants to build bridges, economic bridges and tax bridges and all kinds of, not bridges, walls, sorry. Walls. And he's the guy who's really trying to understand. Anyway, that's my reason.
And I completely agree with that. I happen to not be of the Christian tradition at all. I'm a nice Jewish girl, but I have felt in Pope Francis a voice of humanism, of humility, of humor. And for example, in the documentary, I was so moved, this is Wim Wenders' film, at one point at the UN, there's footage of Pope Francis warning everybody because he says we're too much assuming that we're masters of this earth instead of caretakers. And then he mentions the importance of the 3 T's, tierra, trabajo, and techo, if I remember correctly.
Yeah,
the importance of the land, of work, and of the roof. And after I saw that documentary, which was long before the 2 popes, I wanted to add a 4th T, in Spanish, tocar, because this is a man who literally touches, you know, somebody who physically touches, and you capture so much of that in the film, and who's always reaching, you know, trying to create something better than what he has seen before.
Yeah, 2 weeks ago he was in Tokyo, and I mean, he's still saying the same things, and he had a talk to very young people. It was amazing. He was supporting Greta's movement. He asked the young Japanese to get involved in this youth movement to save the planet because you can do it, the old generation can't. I mean, he's really an extraordinary guy.
Yep. Now, have either of you met Pope Francis yet, either before the film was finished or after? No.
No.
I just shook hands. But,
you did?
Yeah.
And do you know if he has seen the film?
Well, we've just had beginning of last week, we had a screening in Rome to which members of the Vatican were invited, and they turned up, which surprised me. A row of priests and a bishop and a cardinal. And we went and had dinner while they watched the film, and then we came back just as they were leaving. And I think some of the priests were trying to get away without making any comment. I stopped them in the street, and slowly it unfolded that they'd really enjoyed it, and that they were rather amused by being in the street with me. They were, you know, looking at me and looking at the Pope. But the important thing was that Cardinal Turkson, who's a close friend of Benedict's and a good friend of Francis, he said that he liked the film very much, and that he wanted to take a DVD to Francis because he thought he would like it. And you said to...
Yeah, well, we sent the DVDs, subtitled in Spanish.
But you said to Turkson about what did you feel about his... that we said about the church. And
I asked him if we had been very hard on the church. He said, no, I was expecting, I mean, you were very light. I was expecting worse.
Yeah.
So, but he really enjoyed it. I mean, he was happy.
And one thing I remember when Pope Francis was first named, I got a call from Reuters because it turned out that he was the first pope to openly acknowledge that he loved movies, and that apparently his favorite film was Fellini's Juliet of the Spirits. And they asked me to write a little article on why would Pope Francis love Juliet of the Spirits. So I literally started sitting down and trying to research, you know, the idea. I wrote something, I'm not sure if it was any good, but it was one of the reasons that I warmed to the very idea of Pope Francis, that he had watched movies in his youth and remembered them and still cared about them. I bet he wants to see Yours and Will.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
But what I think he will, who am I to say this? It's the very human way in which you and Anthony Hopkins embody these characters. I can imagine that he wouldn't appreciate, and this is so much a function of Fernando's direction, there's this kind of easygoing intimacy. Now, I don't know, I'm going to ask you, Jonathan, about this. You had worked once before with Anthony Hopkins, like over 20 years ago. Was it Dylan Thomas's Under Milkwood?
We're both on a recording of Under Milkwood.
Exactly. And you're both Welshmen. So, I mean, was there already a relationship, or no? This was, because one gets the feeling in the course of the film that the two actors are growing closer together, expressing the way that...
It does. Well, we shot those scenes, the Vatican scenes, our meeting, not the early scenes when we're butting up against each other and, you know, rejecting each other, but the scenes where I go to present my resignation, they were shot kind of chronologically. And that relationship that you see on screen kind of mirrors my relationship with Tony, and that we obviously both knew of each other, and we had thankfully a mutual respect and regard. But that friendship grew, and it grew very quickly. I mean, I admire him as an actor a great deal. I love him as a man. We had a great time together. We had a lot of fun together on and off screen.
Yeah.
And I think it shows that warmth, and it's not anything we had to work hard at.
Sure.
There was just a little thing which I've shared with the rest of the world, so I'll tell you. On the recording of Under Milkwood, Tony was voice number 1 and I was voice number 2. And we come to almost 30 years later in Rome, and there's the call sheet which tells you your work the next day and your name and your character. And your character is given a number according to your importance to the film. And I was number 1 and Tony was number 2. So I had to wait a long time to get my revenge. But he used to greet me each morning with morning number 1, morning number 2. And then as we became friends and we finished the film, he'd sign off his emails to me as Sir number 2.
Oh, very cool.
So I've got to find another way to get back at him.
This is, by the way, mirrored to some extent in the fact that this film and your performances have already received nominations. If I remember correctly, was it the Golden Globes where you are nominated in the Best Actor category and Anthony Hopkins in the Best Supporting supporting actor category. Yeah. There's your 1 and 2, and it would be wonderful if the world were to recognize both for that fantastic contribution. Yeah. Now, one of the reasons that I feel this is such an intimate film where I get to really get closer to the characters is that some of the close-ups, Fernando, are so extreme that I could actually start to tell how one hair of an eyebrow is longer than another in an actor's face. So first for you, I was curious.
You noticed that one.
What's that?
I lost this. I didn't get that.
I got it. What made you choose that kind of extreme close-up? And I'm also curious, secondarily, whether the actor is even aware of the proximity of the camera. But
yeah. Well, actually, the whole this comes a bit before, because I read the script. It was a very intelligent script, but after I signed, I realized that actually it was very dense and very dry. So to make it work, I thought that the best way would be to make it very intimate, very personal, and try to make a film, not a film on a pope talking to a cardinal, but about two men who disagree on everything, but very personal, very... So all the decisions in the film were made to support as well. First of all, we worked in the script for 8 months. Wow. Since the first script till we start shooting was 8 months. And during this period, we add a lot of jokes and that wasn't in the script in the first place, but we start just to make it. So in the first draft, we didn't have the phone call for Lampedusa in the beginning, which really happens, I mean, or the pizza, or the joke about German. It's all
that was one of my favorite.
We start.
It's a German joke. It's not meant to be funny. This place laughed quite a bit at that line.
Yeah.
Whoever added that.
Yeah, no, it's friends that are enfim. I was very aware of what was happening around and collecting ideas. And anyway, always to make the film feel very, very intimate and very humanize the characters. And I found out that things like eating pizza is not funny at all. But when a pope eats pizza, for some reason, it becomes funny. So we use that a lot, just simple things. And the close-ups, I was saying that everything is very simple in the film. The light is very flat, because the reference is frescoes, who has lights. The Sistine Chapel is all frescoes around, and the lighting, the frescoes are use colors to define shapes, not light. It's very flat, so we create light that reflects the frescoes. And it also helps the actors, because there's no shadow. And I knew that the film would work if the actors could be in their best. So the close-ups with the flat light is really so we could read their thoughts. That was the idea.
I knew you weren't. I wasn't aware of the camera being so close. I mean, well, César, the cameraman, I mean, he generally was handheld or some peculiar contraption that he was constantly focusing on us. And then there'd be a static camera occasionally around, getting wider shots at the same time. But I learned a lesson doing Game of Thrones, oddly enough, where you would do huge set-piece scenes. And because the traditional way, when I started filmmaking, was you do the wide shot, the mid shot, and the close-up. And I was doing a particular scene which was quite intense, and eventually I said, they said, okay, they were moving on, they'd got it. And I said, whoa, what about the close-up? And they said, we got it. I said, when? He said, you see that camera up there? That was on you. So you have to remind yourself to, and it's very different now to when I started. The lighting is that much quicker because the cameras are mostly digital. They're lighter, they're more flexible, and they can move with you and around you, and you're less aware of them. And it's great because other lessons that I've learned over the years is that you don't, to stop acting for the camera. I always used to try and accommodate the camera, and because I'm a very accommodating person. But
Well,
but then you know, you just have to concentrate on the person you're acting with. And in this situation, it really lent itself to Tony and I just talking to each other. Yeah. And I trusted Fernando and I trusted Cesar that it would be captured, and it all was.
One of the nicest things I read about it was A.O. Scott's review. He called your interplay, the two actors, a duet with sweet and eccentric harmonies. And he praised how you and Hopkins draw out both the spiritual and psychological dimension of your characters. And I did feel in watching the film, I think, doesn't Pope Benedict actually say something about you have to learn how to listen? That one got the feeling that it's the two actors and the two popes are making a true effort to listen to one another. And we also get a sense of the frustration. One of my favorite moments is when they're about to eat pizza and you realize that the benediction is taking just a little bit too long. You can't wait to have the pizza, and he's still, you know, doing the blessing. And it's that kind of, you know, the tiny moments, the looks, that establish the authenticity of these characters.
Well, I mean, yes, we were doing it, but you have to give thanks to the editor and to Fernando, who made the choices and who allowed the silences to breathe. And because it could be a very different film if it was edited in a different way. It could be very choppy and the dialogue could move very quickly, but there's, it's great when you, it's the silences, when the quiet moments between people when they talk.
But I would add to that in the first third of the film, I found how energizing the editing was. I mean, I don't know if, again, you did this in post-production and it wasn't necessarily in advance. When they're voting the first time, the incredibly quick montage of the pens clicking and what looked... I think my husband, when we first saw the film, at the end of the scene, you whispered to me, bingo. Because there was that sense of this, almost like a game that was being played in a theatrical, important space. And the editing enlivens and makes light what could be considered a very heavy subject. At what point did you decide on that?
Yeah, the editor is a young guy, and he's really brilliant with music, brilliant with rhythm, and he studied by chance theology for 3 years. So he's very into it. He really understands this world, and he just told me this like 2 months ago. I didn't know it. He was so committed to the church, and he never told me. He just told me now. But anyway, he's a really brilliant guy. And for me, all the films that I've made and that I will make, hopefully, I usually go to the sets just to capture image. So we have different camera positions, we try different things, but I really feel that I'm making the film when I'm cutting the film. And then that's when I start changing the order of scenes. Eventually there's a line that was in a scene 20 minutes before, and I just get that line and put here. It's really all mixed up. In this film, there's a lot of flashbacks that comes back and forth to the Sistine Chapel. This is not scripted. This is really the work in the cutting room. That's when I really make the film. That's when I feel there's no pressure. We're alone in a dark room. We can take time. And so we did a lot of ADR. Remember, Jonathan, after we finished, as we were editing, we decided to change something. So we put the voice with our voice, and then we had to call you. How many times we went to ADRs? Like 7, 8 times? Yeah. Because we keep creating lines and adding things. And anyway, it's a process. It's
one of the great things about filmmaking. It's created in the screenplay, then it's created on the set with the actors, and then it takes on a whole new life during the editing process. I have one more question for you about preparation, because you deliver your lines in 4 out of the 5 languages spoken in this film. You seem completely fluent in I'll come back to Spanish, but Italian, Latin, English. But you speak what I know is an Argentine Spanish. When I went to Buenos Aires years ago, I learned how different Buenos Aires Spanish is from Madrid Spanish, for example. Could you talk a little about your linguistic preparation, and did you spend time in Argentina prior to shooting?
Well, what I'm about to say must not leave this room.
It won't.
I learned the entire script in the different languages. I learnt the Spanish, and we filmed with me speaking Spanish. And all that was very accurate, but what wasn't accurate was my Argentine accent. Oh. So that first section is revoiced by an Argentine actor. But my lips are saying all the right things, and I'm thinking all the right things. So it's not like I wasn't going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's not Fellini style. It was because of the accent.
No, and more than that, the guy who changed the voice, he used your intonation, your time. So it's really your acting.
Yeah.
Just the voices.
So I still get the award.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Be aware.
And besides, I bet that when.
No, because he would listen to you speak in Spanish and would just repeat.
Yeah.
Trying to mimic the same rhythm, the same tone.
But the Italian, it was delightful to be able to do the speech on the balcony, because that's I can hear him. There's a recording of him, obviously, so I could copy how he spoke. And the Latin, there's a great line in the film where it says, "Can we not speak? I don't know Latin very as well as you. Can we not speak it anymore?" Which is fine, because I learned just enough. It's good. But the other thing was learning to speak. Sorry, that confused me then. Speaking English with a Spanish accent,
right.
Which had to be accurate, because there's, I don't know how Americans feel it, but as a Welsh person, there's nothing that drives me wilder than a British person, usually an English person, attempting a Welsh accent and getting it wrong and sounding more Indian or Pakistani than Welsh. So I was very conscious that that had to be accurate, and I got the thumbs up from various.
So I felt authenticity visually, verbally, and in terms of the entire film.
But I learned that Tony Hopkins fooled me.
Yeah.
Because I couldn't get the German accent, because I'm Brazilian. I don't have I'm not prepared. I don't have the software. So I would always ask him, Tony, are you sure you're making some? There's a German accent here. He says, yeah, it's very little, but he lied. I mean, because everybody says that he's speaking English.
Well, he did.
Anybody here? Did you felt any accent? Yeah.
But it was very funny when we had our first meeting. We're telling tales now. When we had our first meeting, and we were asked, Tony and I were asked if we were religious at all. And I said no, but I fully expect to be by the end of the film. And Tony had his answer. And then I think Fernando said, no, to me, you are going to be doing a Spanish accent, aren't you? Argentine accent. I said, yes, of course. And Tony, a German accent. Oh, yes, but not too much, not too much. Just because you can overdo these things, just a little, just not in. No. So we shoot the first scene in the helicopter. And the scene's going on, and we land, and Fernando says what he's just told you.
Times.
He said to Tony, Tony, I'm Brazilian, and my ear isn't that good for European, but you are doing a German accent, aren't you? And Tony goes, oh yes, but just not too much, just a little. And I'm sitting there going, you're not doing one at all.
Yeah, I should call the film.
But I didn't have the heart to tell him. So but what Tony does have is the rhythms of speech. So he is much more staccato than me. So I think that's what he felt was the right thing to do for him. And because I think, in a way, if we were both doing distinctive accents, it would be a bit, of 2 hours of it would be a bit not good, really. Comedic, I think.
Understood. Now, you just said something that leads me to ask a question.
The other thing he lied about was when he plays the piano.
It's true.
And Mozart was written as a piece in the script, and a couple of months beforehand he called Fernando and said, I don't think Mozart's right, and I think Smetana would be more right for this piece, because he had a very dark life. He was very, and so I wanted to play Smetana. So we shot that scene where he played.
And he's playing himself. He's a concertist.
And he's playing, definitely. He's a wonderful pianist. And then they went to clear the rights for the Smetana. And they discovered this piece of music doesn't exist.
He composed himself.
And he'd written
lied
it himself.
again. He's a liar. He's a liar.
And he'd passed it off as Smetana. And I think it's just for the royalties that he'd written it. Oh. But it was wonderful. But didn't he also write the German cabaret music?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, that one he owned up to, but he didn't own up to.
Don't trust Tony Hopkins, please.
No, don't.
Never.
That's what makes him such a great actor. There's a very playful questing of identity here. Now, you said, I fully expect to be religious by the time the film is over. I'm curious because, I mean, you've played such a range of characters, and, you know, you've worked with Scorsese and Terrence Malick and obviously Terry Gilliam.
Now, you've chosen two people there. You say I worked with them. Terrence Malick, I did half a day with, and he said good morning to me and thanks very much. That was his direction.
That's one way that directors work. And by the way, this is not the place for me to do it, but I could do a little dissertation on how that is absolutely understandable about Terrence Malick's films.
And Scorsese?
Age of Innocence.
I'm doing the scene with Dan Day-Lewis, and he goes and watches it on the monitor, and he comes out and says, yeah, that's good, that's good, that's good. Yeah, it's good. Do you want to do it again? Yeah, okay. Okay, so we do it again. He goes, yeah, it's great, it's great. Do you want to do it again? Yeah, okay, we'll do it again. And that was his direction. So anyway, it might be different for different things.
Well, then now you're giving me two different questions.
He never said to me, do you want to do it again? He would say, that's enough, thank you. Don't do it again.
Okay, so.
There you go, back to you.
No, but my first question was going to be...
You've got me late at night. I'm coming out with all these secrets.
Actually, it's wonderful that we can learn something about the actual process as opposed to, you know, the mythologizing of how directors and actors work. But, all right, so I'm curious, first of all, whether playing Pope Francis has indeed affected you as a human being. In other words, was it, on a human level, not just professionally, something that slightly changed you at all?
I don't know. I think I had my beliefs in humanity confirmed. My faith is not in an organized religion. It's in my fellow man. It's in the people I interact with. It's in my family, and I feel that's how he feels. And I wouldn't make any great claims. I mean, every job I do, I learn something. It's been, for the past almost 50 years, my education. I went to art school. I never intended to be an actor. And I didn't have an education that was in any way an intellectual education. I never went to university. So my work over all these years has been my education. And this kind of, if I never make another film, this is like the culmination of all things I've learned about filmmaking, but all things I've learned about life. And I can't help but take away something from it, even if it's just my respect for the man, and I don't want to tarnish that respect I have for him. And a couple of things happen. It's a great privilege to have played him, actually. But in Buenos Aires, the Jesuit priest we were working with, when I was leaving the set, and we've been doing that scene where I was sorting clothes for the poor and, well, real people in real shelter. And the priest came to say goodbye to me, and before, he said, before you go, would you mind if I blessed you? And that might not be a big deal to a lot of people, but I hadn't been blessed since I was baptized as a baby. And I said, yeah, fine, you know. And he blessed me, and I felt this kind of some overwhelming something happening. And it was again, a combination of everything that happened when we were filming in Buenos Aires, but I found myself asking him, would he bless my family? And, you know, there's something, there is something, you know, it's been proved right for 2,000 years for all of us, our faiths and our religion. Wherever you find your spirituality, there's something, it's there, it's present. And I found it in things like going to concerts and music, and going to Leonard Cohen concerts, and most recently going to see David Byrne in American Utopia, which I went to twice, because it is the most wonderful, life-affirming, inspiring hour and a half you could spend with 12 people on a stage. His songs are simple, but they're sort of elegiac in a way, in the way he sings. There's no barrier between him and what he's singing. It just comes out, and it's glorious, glorious. And you know, there's my faith and there's my spirituality.
I can understand that and appreciate that, as I'm sure many people here can. We have only 10 minutes left for audience questions. We're going to ask that the lights come up a little bit so that we can see if you have a hand. Please do raise it. And there's one on the aisle.
Can I also say, just before, the last thing I'll say before you compose your questions is that somebody said to Anthony McCartan after a screening, he says, you do realize you've made a Jewish film, don't you? And he said, what are you talking about? He said, it's two rabbis talking about the scriptures, talking about the Talmud, discussing, making jokes. And so I don't know if you agree or not.
Well, I agree, because the last line of the film is the real Pope Francis telling the real Pope Benedict, and please eat well.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
There you go. Yes, on the aisle.
Is there any coordination or speaking, discussion between you as playing yourself as an older man and the young man who plays you as a young man?
Question about the coordination between the young actor who played Bergoglio as a young man and you playing the older character.
One Menuhin, yeah.
Yeah, well, there was. We met in London, and we read things together. I think when it was kind of set, I got there first, so I established the role. And Juan looked at a lot of film of me when I was younger, and to get the way I phrased things and get the way I walked a bit, and just a sense of me. And he also helped me with my Spanish. He put things on tape for me to learn. But I worried initially that he doesn't look anything like me. But that's, in some ways, it's reinforced by the nature of the film, isn't it? Because it's about how people change and develop. So it didn't matter that it's not exact, you know, it's lucky that I look like Pope Francis, but it didn't matter that he doesn't look that much. It's not about that. It's
very well.
Sorry?
You have matured very well.
He said you have matured very well.
Yeah.
There is one question in the back here and one question there, and then that'll be the last.
Can you talk a little bit about the music in the film?
The music.
The music, yeah, well, the music, we as I was saying, everything in the film is supposed to make the film human and simple, and so we used a lot of some known music, it's ABBA or Beatles, and the music that Bryce Dessner, the composer, have created is also very simple. It's mostly guitar and voices, and for the guitar, he's very sophisticated guitar player. He changed all the strings. Instead of using metal strings, he used nylon strings, which is cheap and sounds more like South America, so would sound more like Pope Francis. It's really, but the combination of those different source music, we used a bit of Mercedes Sosa and Dino Saluzzi, who is a great bandoneon player in Argentina. They used to make it very popular, like Pope Francis. And when we show, like when Pope Benedict comes to the balcony, so the German side of the film, then this is the orchestra, and we Bryce has created a kind of Wagnerian music for Pope Benedict. So Pope Francis is always popular, and Benedict is more German. And the same thing with the camera. I mean, the camera work. With Benedict, is steady shots and he's small in the frame, and Pope Francis is handheld, close to him. There's always this.
And I love the way you use the saxophone music twice. It almost draws the Francis character into the church. The first time, you know, in black and white, and the second time, the saxophone is almost like the call. It's beautiful.
Yeah, because we had the saxophone in Sistine Chapel, so I decided to use it in Argentina. And the idea of the saxophone in Sistine Chapel is because he's looking at the Last Judgment, Michelangelo, and in the Sistine Chapel there's lots of paintings, Botticelli, a lot of really big masters, but they all look very steady and stiff when you compare to Michelangelo, which is pure creation. He's really a jazz painter, you know. There's life, there's movement, so we thought we couldn't show Michelangelo with the classical music, with Haydn or anything. So I decided to go for jazz, because that's Michelangelo.
That's great. Question there?
First of all, Mazel tov on incredible storytelling.
Mazel tov on incredible storytelling, yeah.
And very appropriate that Mrs. Maisel is downstairs and Mrs. Jacobs are upstairs.
Yeah, downstairs we have the fabulous, the marvelous Mrs. Maisel with Rachel Brosnahan at the same time, one flight down.
All right.
The last thing that I want to mention before my question is, to your, what you said about your spirituality, 92I is like that for me, and that's a lot of reason because of Annette, so thank you, and if I can cancel my trip to the Bahamas on Saturday to be here for Greta, I would. But my question is, obviously, where did you film? How did you create, like, we had an argument the whole time. Are they actually filming in the Vatican, or are they not? I said no, he said yes. What is the answer?
Where did you film?
Well,
we weren't in Buenos Aires. We filmed in many of the locations where Francis was, and when I prepared dinner in the
kitchen where he would cook every weekend.
And
bedroom, we used his own bedroom.
And we had the actual barber who cuts his hair, cutting my hair, or pretending to cut it because it had to be continuity with the film. He was very disgruntled that he thought my hair was too long. And then in Rome, the Vatican don't allow filming within the Vatican or in the precincts of the Vatican. So we built the Sistine Chapel. I say we, but we built the Sistine Chapel in Cinecittà. Mark Tilsley, brilliant designers. They spent, I think, 6 to 8 weeks recreating it. And it's 5 centimeters, couple of inches bigger than the real Sistine Chapel, so that Mark can boast that he's built the biggest Sistine Chapel in the world. And then the Vatican and Castel Gandolfo were other palaces north and south of Rome and Naples. And
St. Peter's Square, we couldn't shoot there, so it's all green screen and extras, and then it's all looks like documentary that we went with a little camera and shot like a. No, it's how to make I don't know, $3 million shot looks like $200 shot.
Yeah.
That was the trick.
Wow.
It's true. It's all VFX. Union is the guys who done it in London.
Yeah.
Okay, last question.
This is for Fernando. So the intent, I believe, of the screenwriter was the message and the messenger. But what was your inspiration? How did you get drawn into this?
If the intent of the screenplay was both the message and the messenger, what was
the message and the messenger?
The message, I guess.
The theological message of both, like the old fabric and the new fabric in the Catholic Church.
The theological message of both the old fabric and the new fabric in the Catholic Church. But then what would be your intention?
Yeah.
Or motivation.
Yeah. For me, I see different levels of messages in the film, if we can say that. One is more personal, which is the idea of tolerance, of listening to people who we disagree with and trying to find the common ground. And I think the whole world is very polarized nowadays. Well, here in US, my country, everywhere you look, you have to, and inside the church is the same. So what we see in the church reflects what is happening in the world, and these two guys, they were able to come to an understanding. I think nowadays, both popes, they still don't agree with most of what they think. But there's affection. I'm quite sure that there's real affection, so that's something. And also, I like the message on forgiveness and self-forgiveness. I know a lot of people who, I mean, destroy their lives. They don't talk to their family because they have problems. You don't forgive. So you carry that thing, or you don't forgive yourself for something, and you destroy your life. Anyway, this idea of that you must forgive yourself and you must forgive the others, I think is really... There's also, in a different level, there's the political level, which is Pope Francis' agenda, which I think was the thing that brought me to this project. The idea that we have an economic system that is very unfair, that creates inequality. And in the end of the film, we add, this wasn't scripted, but we add the refugee crisis. I think the refugee crisis we know that's going to grow a lot in the next 10, 15 years because of climate crisis, will become something huge that can destabilize the whole world. I'm very pessimistic. So I was glad to include refugee crisis there. And in the spiritual level, I love I'm not religious, but I like the idea of us being able to connect to something. Sometimes we lose this connection. But if you keep your exercise, or yoga, or your Tai Chi, or if you still go to the church, at some point you can reconnect. I love this idea, and this is in the film.
Yeah. Well, all I can do is to say how grateful I am that we have had the opportunity to see this film on a big screen. You can watch it on Netflix, but a big screen with the sound system helps.
Big screen.
And how much I look forward to more nominations and more awards that this film deservedly should be getting. But just, you know, it warms my heart when we can share a film that is not only beautifully crafted by actor, director, screenwriter, etc., but that does indeed make us question and reaffirm our values, beginning with how we treat one another, how we talk to one another. And if the film shows anything at all, it's that people who might be adversaries on the surface, if they get to know one another, they're going to find common ground. And what's the line from the film? Mercy is the dynamite that blows
down walls.
Let's hope that continues. Thank you so much for joining us.